For you all that don't know, I am a big horror fan, and that's what we're talking about today, my top 10 horror films of the decade. So lock your doors, close your windows, check under your bed, because we're going to talk about some horror films. Let's jump right into it. What's going on, everybody? Elliot here from Movie Files, going over my top 10 horror films of this past decade. Very excited to share my list with you all today. But before we dive into it, definitely consider subscribing to my channel. Hit that bell so you can stay up to date with my latest movie reviews, TV reviews, unboxings, giveaways, and all the fun things we do on this channel. And since this is my top 10 horror films of the decade, I want to know your top 10, your top 5, your top 3, your number 1. Let me know in the comments. There's no right or wrong answer, just a fun conversation amongst us horror fans out there. So let's have some fun dialogue in the comments below. So before I jump into my top 10 list, let me mention some honorable mentions here. One being 2016's Don't Breathe. Most recently, Halloween 2018. I really enjoyed that film, but didn't make the cut. 2016 Green Room, a film I really enjoyed. Very visceral horror film. 2014's The Babadook. I really enjoyed that film. Jennifer Kent, great director. And then most recently, 2019's Us. Didn't make the cut, but definitely some films I really enjoyed. But I must mention, I know this isn't a movie, but it's one of my favorite pieces of horror in the last decade, and that is The Haunting on Hill House on Netflix. I reviewed that show on my channel 2018. Very great series. I'm excited to see season 2. It's going to be a different family, a different setting. Very excited for it, but I just definitely want to throw that into the mix. So let's start my list off with my number 10 movie. Horror film of the decade, and that is 2015's The Invitation, which I saw on Netflix probably 2 years ago. Was very, very pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed that film. It was my first time really being exposed to Logan Marshall Green. I thought that the acting was great. I thought that the story was really interesting. The twist that we got in the film and everything that it had to offer. It's just one of those films where I just remember watching on Netflix, hearing a little bit about it, and I think it's kind of caught on in the last few years, but heard very little about it. And it's one of those situations where it was a Saturday night, nothing was on to watch as far as Netflix. Saw it was recommended and watched it and was very pleasantly surprised by it. So that definitely made my list. 2015's The Invitation. Number 9. Arguably one of my favorite remakes in the last decade, no matter what the genre is, and that is Evil Dead of 2013. Fede Alvarez, who I'm a big fan of. Like I had mentioned, Don't Breathe was on my honorable mentions there, but very big fan of his work, and excited to see what he does next in the horror realm. I believe he was saying he was going to make a Don't Breathe sequel. There was supposed to be a Evil Dead sequel from the 2013, and throwing in some of the characters that we've seen in the past franchises. So I really enjoyed that remake. It is bloody. It is funny at times. It is really well shot. I mean, the blood, I think, outside of It Chapter 2, I think that was like the most blood I've ever seen on the screen with that, towards the end of the film. Really enjoyable remake. I thought that he obviously paid homage to the Evil Dead and Sam Raimi's Evil Dead, but added his own flavor and touch to it. And it is like I said, it's one of my favorite remakes of any genre in the last decade. And I really, if you all haven't seen 2013's Evil Dead, definitely recommend it. So, on to my number 8, a film that really doesn't get talked about that often as far as the slasher genre, which I grew up in the slasher era, being a 90s kid, growing up in Scream, and, I Know What You Did Last Summer and all that. But this film was a film that I visit pretty frequently on the Halloween season, and that is 2011's You're Next, Adam Wingard's film. I'm a big fan of Adam Wingard, like The Guest. Very excited to see what he's going to do with King Kong versus Godzilla. But I thought that film had a mixture of comedy, some really interesting characters, a great final girl, and just a brutal slasher film. And it really doesn't get talked about all too often. I was part of an Instagram group where we reviewed a bunch of horror films in the month of October, and that was one of the films I wanted to review, which is Your Next. And it was just, again, I really enjoyed that film. I visited pretty frequently throughout the Halloween season. I love the score of the movie, that soundtrack that they had there, that song. It's just a really good slasher film, and I don't think a lot of people have seen it, so definitely check it out if you haven't already. And that's my number 8, which is 2011's You're Next by Adam Wingard. Very good director, and very excited for his future films. So, 7th film of the decade for horror films. And that is 2018's A Quiet Place, directed by John Krasinski and stars John Krasinski and his wife, Emily Blunt. And also, that was my first time being exposed to Noah Jope, who I think is a great up-and-coming actor. But you talk about a memorable movie theater experience. That's one of my most memorable experiences ever, because it was a somewhat packed house. I saw it pretty earlier in the day because I didn't want to be bothered with teens and people on their phones when I saw it later, going to a later evening screening. So I saw it like around 4 or 5. 5 when it came out in 2018. And I just remember, again, it was a somewhat packed house, but everyone was just locked in. No one was on their phone. No one was screaming or yelling. It was such a theatrical experience that I would never forget. And then on top of it, the movie was fantastic in my opinion. It wasn't John Krasinski's first film, but it was definitely his first time diving into the horror genre. And I thought he did a great job of directing the film, also being a co-writer. And of course, Emily Blunt, one of my favorite actresses in the past decade and just of all time. I'm a big fan of her work. I'll never forget that scene in the tub and just the agony and the pain. And she was trying to protect her and her new baby. I just thought that film was excellent. And I'm very excited to see what they do with part 2 and everyone coming back for, chapter 2 or part 2. But Quiet Place is a film that I really enjoyed. I watch it very frequently, and I'm just a big fan of that film. So that is my number 7. On to my number 6. That is 2017's It Chapter 1. What can I say about that film? Andy Muschietti did a great job. I thought the kids were fantastic. It was really, it's not a film, and I know this is not controversy, but I know a lot of people it's not necessarily a scary film for some people like myself, but I found it to be a very thrilling, suspenseful film with the coming of age elements, and I really enjoyed it. It was like, in this decade, as far as what I can remember or was coming to mind, it was the first kind of big blockbuster horror film in the decade. If you remember the marketing of the film and obviously how much it made successfully, it's the biggest horror film of all time, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember that film making over $100 million when it came out opening weekend, and obviously I think it made over close to $700 million worldwide, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the highest grossing horror film of all time. It was a phenomenon. Obviously, It Chapter 2 wasn't as well received, and you can check out my review for Chapter 2, but I definitely enjoyed Chapter 1 a lot more. Again, it wasn't the scariest film, but I just love the elements of thriller, suspense. Pennywise, that was been Bill Skarsgård coming out party to me as one of just a great actor, and I love that he played the role. And again, those kids were phenomenal, and a lot of them are obviously having a big careers now. But I just remember being at the theater and just enjoying the hell out of that film, and it's such a joyride for me. It's one of those horror films, again, might not be the scariest, but there's a lot of thrills, a great coming-of-age story, and I really enjoyed that film for my number 6 spot. So now jumping into my top 5. Before I jump into it, definitely, like I said up top, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and make sure you're leaving your comments below what your favorite films are, and if you have some of those films from my top 6 through 10 and some of the honorable mentions, let me know if they're on your top 10. If you have some other films that you want to add to the list, let me know in the comments below. So now on to the top 5, and that is 2018's Hereditary. Now, fun fact, I've seen Hereditary twice. Once in the theater and once at home, and I haven't watched it since. Not because it's a bad film, it's obviously on my list, but I am legit, like, there's something about that film that just gets under my skin. It's like just the unsubtleness of the girl and Toni Collette, who's phenomenal, and her relationship with her son, and just the imagery in that film just gets to me. Like, I think people are in the corners of the rooms when I see the film, and it's something about people running at people in horror films just freaks me out, man. And that film is just such a well done film. Ari Aster, his directorial debut, and I'm a big fan of Midsommar, which didn't make my cut, but it's definitely a film I enjoyed, and it was one of my, it was a film that I really enjoyed in 2019. But what can I say about Ari Aster as a director in his directorial debut? He knocked it out of the park. Again, Toni Collette, I thought, was robbed that year to get a nomination for Best Actress. It's just a creepy film, and it definitely, like I said, I've only watched it twice, and I might watch it again just because I'm thinking about it. But it is a film that definitely gets under my skin, and that's my number 5. That's 2018's Hereditary. Number 4 is 2010 Insidious. That has a special spot for me in my heart because that was when I was in college, and I actually went to school for film and video, and my teacher of the class was actually a executive producer, one of the producers. There's many producers involved in film, and he was actually a producer of the film. And I remember seeing this movie, like, I saw the first cut of this film, and I saw it at a theater. I remember that experience. And just, on top of that, I'm a big James Wan fan. I'm a big Patrick Wilson, Rose Byrne fan, and I just think that film is such a great horror film. It's one of those horror films that didn't need a lot of blood, much of any blood, if I'm not remember. It's been a couple years since I watched Insidious, but it's definitely, one of my favorites. But it didn't need blood. It didn't need a lot of jump scares. It's just a story about a family wanting to save their son, and then you get a bunch of crazy ass demons in this movie. And it is a film, like I said, just near and dear to my heart. Seeing the first cut and being, seeing where James Wan is now, and obviously we got the sequels later on, and getting the Lee Whannell coming out of that, and some other talented people out of that bunch of people that made that movie. But Insidious, man, if you haven't watched that film in a while, definitely check it out. It definitely holds up. Like I said, it's been about a year or so since I watched it, but it's definitely one of my favorites of this decade, and that's my number 4. on my list. So number 3 is a film that I recently came upon last year on Netflix, a film that I heard so many great things about it, but I didn't see it until last year, and that is Train to Busan. What can I say about it? It's probably one of my favorite zombie films of all time. I was blown away by how they shot the film. I was, locked in, no matter if it is a subtitle film. I was engaged. I was locked in. I cared about the characters. I thought that the zombies were badass, but at the core of its story, it's a dad trying to keep his daughter safe from these zombies. You had the relationship between the husband and wife, and he sacrificed himself. And there's just so much about that film, and I was just blown away by it. Again, I'm a big zombie fan, and obviously in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, we got a lot of zombie stuff, from The Walking Dead to a bunch of movies, and it kind of took a little bit of a break. But that movie to me in 2016, Train to Busan, definitely one of my favorite zombie films of all time. And I'm believe they're doing a sequel coming out next year, or this year, I should say, or 2020, I'm sorry, that I'm very excited to see what they do with that sequel. So that is my number 3 of the decade, Train to Busan, a 2016 South Korean film. So final 2. So number 2 on my list is a film that I've watched very frequently. It is, again, one of my favorite directors. I love the cast. I love the story. I love the thrills, the horror elements to it. And that is 2013, The Conjuring. I remember that film. Again, you talk about it being a big blockbuster push. That film came out in the summer of 2013 and blew the the box office off, and had a great summer release. And then, of course, we had The Conjuring 2 that came out a couple years later, and we're getting The Conjuring 3 coming out next year, and I'm very excited for that. We don't have James Wan coming back, but regardless, this film, you talk about, being invested in the characters, in the Warren family, and everything that story had to offer. And again, not relying on blood or too many jump scares. Just a really well done story with great acting and a great story. And again, the way James Wan uses the camera and the way he shoots the stuff and the transitions and the soundtrack and the score and the atmosphere. Great director, and this is definitely, like I said, The Conjuring still scares me to date. I remember being in the theater in the scene when the girl was sleepwalking and then the ghost jumped on her. Still gets me today. I love that film, and that is my number 2. So before I give you all my number 1, again, like I said, comment below. Let me know what's on your top 10, your top 5, your top of the decade. Let me know in the comments. And again, let's have some fun discussions down there. There's no right or wrong answers about this list, my list or your list. So definitely comment below. So with that being out of the way, my number 1 horror film of the decade is 2017 Get Out. I remember going back to seeing the trailer. I thought, what the hell is this movie about? Jordan Peele, he's doing horror. Is this a spoof on horror films? I love Kay and Peele and all the stuff they did, but I'm like, really? He's jumping into horror? But boy, is he one of my favorite directors working in Hollywood. I love what he's done with the genre. Like I said, Us was in my honorable mentions. I'm excited to see what he does with Candyman. I know he's not directing it, but he's executive producer, and obviously excited to see what he does in the future. But this film blew the socks off me. I don't even know what I'm saying. Blew the socks off of me. It's a great film, and I remember going to see it and it being the talk of the town that year. And obviously, he got the what did he win? The best screenplay that year at the Oscars, and it definitely deserved that, and he was nominated for Best Director. Daniel Kaluuya was great in that film. I just thought that film was excellent from top to bottom. I watch it still to this date. It's something I watch on a very regular basis because it's one of those few films, no matter what the genre is, where I can watch it and just still pick something out of the story, whether it be how his girlfriend reacted to him and how she played the role, Allison Williams, or Alice, I think that's her last name. How what the twist is. Obviously now I've seen it about 30 times, but you can just pick the nuances in her performance and Daniel Kaluuya's reaction and when he finds out about his family. And it's just such a well done film, and all the the little social commentary that the film had to say. It's just one of those films that you get every once in a decade type of films. And that's my number 1 film of the decade. That is 2017's Get Out by Jordan Peele. Excellent film. So there you have it. My honorable mentions, my top 10 list of the decade for horror films, a genre that I grew up on, and I love it, and I'm excited to see what 2020 has to offer in the horror genre and what the next decade of horror films has to offer. So there you have it. Like I said up top, let me know your list in the comments below. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Hit that bell so you can stay up to date with my content. Like and share, subscribe. Follow me on all my social media accounts. Got a lot of other lists coming pretty soon. Top 10 superhero films of decades coming out pretty soon. I have my top 10 movies of 2019, favorite shows of 2019, and most anticipated of 2020. So definitely keep an eye out for those videos. Thank you all again for watching this video. Again, I want to know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's have some dialogue down there. But again, thank you all for watching this video, and we'll see you on the next one.